Hello, everyone. Good day and welcome to FOODBIZ Plus, a monthly series of conversations from the Food Business School. I'm Kathy Joran. I'm the director of the Food Business School, which is the graduate and executive education division of the Culinary Institute of America, also now part of a larger school of graduate and professional studies at the Culinary Institute of America. The Food Business School, as I mentioned, is graduate and executive education, and our mission is to enable and empower our students to design, deliver, and lead transformative innovations that address the world's most pressing food systems challenges and what we also believe are its greatest business opportunities. Today, we're going to be talking about plant-forward menus and what's next. And I thought I would just give you the CIA's definition of plant-forward cuisine, a style of cooking that emphasizes and celebrates, but is not limited to plant-based foods, including fruits and vegetables, produce, whole grains, beans, and other legumes, pulses, nuts and seeds, plant oils, and herbs and spices, and that reflects evidence-based principles of health and sustainability. You can find this plant-forward definition on our Menus of Change website, which is a joint initiative of the CIA and Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Department of Nutrition, as well as on our Plant Forward website, which is plantforwardkitchen.org in the overview area. Both Plant Forward Kitchen and Menus of Change are thought leadership conferences that the CIA runs through our strategic initiatives and thought leadership division. And those conferences focus on health and wellness as well as sustainability. And therefore, the Plant Forward Kitchen is a perfect fit into those particular areas of concern for all of us in the food industry. So Plant Forward menus, what's next? Today we have a special guest, Zak Weston. Zak is the Foodservice and Supply Chain Manager at the Good Food Institute. You can see Zak here. Welcome, Zak. And Good Food Institute is also noted by GFI, and it is a nonprofit organization focused on creating a healthy, just, and sustainable food system through plant-based protein innovation, fermentation-derived proteins, and cellular agriculture. He consults with leading food service operators, food manufacturers, and alternative protein supply chain companies to help increase the quality and quantity of their plant-based meat, egg, and dairy offerings and meet the growing consumer demand for alternative protein foods. An active member of the effective altruism community, Zak holds a bachelor's degree in business management from Cedarville University, and he joined GFI after several years of experience in sales and working with startups. So plant-based proteins are playing a significant role in plant-forward menus. Although plant-based burgers are one of the hottest trends in food service, burgers aren't the only way that plant-based concept is disrupting the center of the plate proteins. Today, we will talk with Zak about GFI's research into what consumers are looking for next in plant-based foods. We will explore emerging technologies and products that are poised to enter mainstream food service over the next few years. And finally, we will discuss marketing strategies for plant-based foods and find inspiration for innovative menu items and products that can appeal to generations of eaters, all with a focus on deliciousness, because of course, if it's not delicious, nobody will want to enjoy it anyway. So after the conversation with Zak, please stay with us for just a few minutes so I can tell you about some upcoming programs that we have and some other things that are currently going on through the Food Business School and through the School of Graduate and Professional Studies at the CIA. All right, so we'll get started with Zak. Thank you again for joining me today, Zak. Really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing your insights to our audience.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Great. So let's start by talking about promoting plant-forward dishes. What do you see are the biggest challenges to face when it comes to promoting plant-based products to a mainly meat-eating society?
Yeah, so this question comes up in a lot of forms, and I think a lot of what it boils down to is just that there's a lot of history with plant-based foods. Plant-based protein is certainly nothing new. It's been part of a lot of cultural and ethnic traditions of cooking for thousands of years. But within sort of mainstream, if we're looking and focusing specifically on the United States, I think previous generations of plant-based foods, to put it diplomatically, we're not always known for being the most taste forward or exactly mainstream of food choices. And that was for a very understandable reason. A lot of those products were really targeted at niche audiences like vegans and vegetarians. But when we think about the just sort of two intersecting mega trends that really are, we think, are driving forward the plant-based explosion that we're seeing today. And the first one is that the consumer base in the United States has really shifted. Things like health, sustainability, different elements of nutrition and diets are all of a sudden very much top of mind for a much larger share of the consumer base than they ever were before. And then you combine that on the sort of on the demand side with what's happened on the supply side for plant-based food, which is that they've gotten a lot more flavorful. The plant-based industry has gotten a lot better at formulating products and making sure that foods are produced in a way that's appealing to a mainstream audience, composed of omnivores and flexitarians, people who are interested in eating more plants, eating more plant protein, but don't want to sacrifice flavor. So I think the biggest challenge to overcome right now for the plant-based industry is overcoming some of those bad taste memories, right? If you've had a bad experience with poorly cooked tofu or a black bean burger maybe that was really mushy, we know that there are ways that chefs and culinary professionals can make amazing dishes, and we can cook plant-based and plant-forward things at home really well, but not every consumer has had that experience, and certainly a lot of food industry professionals have not had that experience. So I think the biggest challenge to overcome is really introducing this as sort of the next generation or next wave of taste-forward, plant-based, plant-forward dishes and products, and overcoming that memory or that history is, I think, the biggest challenge.
And not only flavor, but texture, right?
Absolutely. Everything having to do with the sensory experience, flavor, texture, smell, the cooking cues, how it changes color when you're cooking it, even how it sounds when you're cooking it. There's a lot of things that have dramatically improved. Ease of preparation and convenience, requires less training if you're in a commercial kitchen, or less preparation if you're a home chef. So absolutely, a massive amount of innovation that's happening. But this category has a history, and it's part of what we need to do is show that plants can be delicious, flavorful, provide satiety and fillingness, and give consumers what they're looking for from food.
So would you say that what you just said would be the most important message to convey to potential consumers of plant-based cuisine, the changes and that's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we as an organization, I think a lot of folks within the food industry are certainly focused on that kind of the question that's on the slide there. How are we going to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050 and do it in a way that's sustainable? And we focus a lot on plant-based dishes because they're extraordinarily sustainable. There's really strong arguments for why plant-based meat, egg, and dairy products are just way more ecologically efficient and require far fewer resource inputs than other dishes. But what we've really found over the years, over decades of public health education, you can't just tell consumers or yell at consumers to make more ethical food choices. You really have to meet them where they are and with what actually matters to them. And yes, exactly. At the end of the day, the most important messages to be conveying when we're talking about plant-based foods are really the same messages we should be conveying about all of our food that is reaching a mainstream audience. And it's about the things that consumers truly actually want when it comes down to that purchase decision. Health is extremely important, and nutrition, those are very strong aspirational drivers. Sustainability is an important driver. And what's key is those motivations get stronger every year in the United States. But at the end of the day, when we're making that food decision, when we're standing in front of a menu board or reading a printed menu, or we're at a buffet, or we're at home looking at our fridge and thinking about what to cook, of course, it all comes down to flavor. What's something I can look forward to? What's going to give me the energy that I need to accomplish what I want to accomplish? Or what's something I can do that's convenient for my family if I'm cooking for a family situation? So, and again, that's something that this category has historically struggled with. So when it comes down to specific promotional strategies, I don't think we really need to reinvent the wheel here. It's stuff that should, I think, be very familiar to most people. A lot of the marketing strategies you use to market animal meat or animal-derived egg and dairy products should also be used for plant-based products. So make flavor the primary message, price it in a way that's reasonably competitive, make sure it's widely available and very convenient to prepare. Make it familiar. That's one of the things that stood out a lot in our research, is that consumers often want to try something fun and unique, but it needs to be not too crazy or too out there and wild for them to give it a chance. And so when you package something that's a little bit unfamiliar in a more familiar format, or a familiar flavor, or maybe a familiar preparation style, it just makes it that much more palatable to a consumer. And that's part of why, we use the example a lot of plant-based burgers. But even though this is a burger that's made from plants, and that's super weird, and not a lot of people necessarily have had a lot of experience with that category, it is at the end of the day a burger. And that format is just intuitive to a consumer. We look at a burger, we know instantly what to do with it. We know we want to put condiments on it. We have different toppings or different preparation styles that we associate with burgers. So it's just a really natural next step to say, oh, that's just like a burger I'm used to having, but with a twist. It's made from plants. So and yeah, emphasizing flavor, familiarity, good photos, convenience, accessibility, all that is very important when marketing plant-based and plant-forward dishes.
Great, thank you. You mentioned a little bit about health and nutrition, but do you see that the industry, the manufacturers of these products, are beginning to use better and healthier ingredients in these products?
Yeah, absolutely. And this question comes up a lot too, because a lot of plant-based foods are just incredibly clean labels, even single ingredient things. So plant-based alternatives to meat and eggs and dairy, to a certain extent, really exist on a spectrum. So there are some plant-based foods that are extraordinarily one true ingredients, very whole food focused. Things like tempeh, seitan, tofu, obviously using beans, grains, pulses, legumes, that type of thing. And then you have various degrees of processing and higher numbers of ingredients. And then of course a lot of the newer generation of plant-based products are using different types of plant proteins. They're mixing it together with a lot of other things to create a really enjoyable sensory experience that closely mimics the taste, texture, smell, all of the the mouthfeel, all the things you associate with meat. And there's a lot of products that sit somewhere along that spectrum. And in that way, it's not really that different from how animal products exist, right? There are some certainly extraordinarily healthy, single origin, free range, organic, grass-fed steaks. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's plenty of, quote unquote, processed or long ingredient lists or more restructured type products that have a lot of extra ingredients. And so the reality is, in both cases, both in plant and animal derived sources of meat, eggs, and dairy, there are different types of products for different consumers. I think at the end of the day, it should be the goal of the food industry in all forms of protein to try to move consumers to more healthy, nutritious options. But it's something that the entire industry bears responsibility for. The last thing I'll say is that I think a lot of the plant protein producers, particularly the ones that are making some of the products that have a little bit more ingredients that are more that meat mimic, for example, are certainly aware that there's an interest in cleaner ingredient decks. And that's something I think that an enormous amount of innovation and investment in R&D is being made to correct. This industry, we have to remember, even though it's grown quickly, it's still really small. And a lot of the ingredients that we rely on as inputs, whether it's the protein sources or the flavors or whatnot, end up often being sort of side streams or waste streams almost from other much bigger industries. So as this sector garners more size and purchasing power and kind of unlocks that economies of scale, we're able to start actually breeding crops directly for use in plant-based meat, egg, and dairy applications. We're able to leverage new types of ingredients like algae and fungi and other things to provide maybe a protein source that doesn't require, an extra flavor additive. For example, maybe it has a better flavor as a protein ingredient itself, doesn't require an extra ingredient. So we are, even though this is, a new and exciting field, we are just getting started. And so there's a lot of innovation still left to happen that'll absolutely, bring that health and nutrition quality up while reducing some of the ingredient inclusions and reducing price as well.
Right. I'm sure as it grows, the supply chain processes will improve and be more substantial to provide for all those different products. Do you think that consumers understand the nutritional value of plant-based proteins, and do they consider them healthy alternatives to animal proteins?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of consumers, like when we look at different research from various market research firms, it seems to indicate that consumers generally view plant proteins as healthier. And we think there's justification for that. Like there's certainly plenty of nutritional studies that suggest that dietary patterns like the Mediterranean dietary diet patterns and like blue zone type diets feature a high number of plants, a really, really high amount of plant protein as your primary sources of protein. Additionally, like just at a sort of a micro or macronutrient level, plant-based products tend to have a lot of fiber. There's no cholesterol. They're typically on average is less saturated fat, no trans fats. There's no need for antibiotics. So there's a lot of reasons to think that it is in general going to be healthier in a lot of cases. But all that to say, definitely more nutritional studies are warranted. And this is something that I think is a conversation certainly the industry really welcomes as a comparison. A lot of the studies, as I alluded to, do seem to indicate that consumers have a positive health perception associated with plant-based products. A recent study that we found pretty interesting was from the International Food Information Council, and it showed the nutrition facts panels for both just like single, 100% beef versus a plant-based burger that relatively similar ingredient-wise to a lot of stuff that's on the market. And just looking at the nutrition facts panels, about 40% of consumers preferred the plant-based burger to 45%, to about 25% for the animal beef burger. When you show the ingredient lists, that number gets a little bit closer. So it's about 40% of consumers prefer the plant-based option versus 30% that prefer the animal-based option. So absolutely, that ingredient consideration is an important one for plant-based companies and plant-based dishes. But all the same, like just like everyone else, plant-based companies are very forthcoming and transparent with what's on their labels. And so far, even when you stack them side by side, nutrition facts panels and ingredient lists, consumers have consistently shown that they do view plant proteins as healthier, and we have good reason to think that they're right. But more research is certainly warranted on that.
Right. Well, that's great. Great to know. And then, how about? Do you think that plant-based foods are perceived like GMO foods? Are they perceived as having genetically modified ingredients, or is that just a sort of a side concern?
Yeah, I think a lot of consumers, certain subset of consumers definitely kind of lump all, forms of food science or processing, together. And so there's certainly some concern that some of the, the negative perceptions that certain consumer groups have of GMOs could affect plant-based foods. But again, consumers are voting with their wallets and feet, right? Plant-based has been embraced in a variety of forms. Some plant-based products do rely on GMO ingredients, and those products have done very well. A lot of other plant-based companies intentionally stay away from GMO ingredients, and those companies have also done really well. So officially, or at least we remain agnostic. I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to what the consumer is looking for, and the industry can respond either way. There's no one way to do plant-based. It can be GMO or non-GMO. It can be whole food. It can be more like, an assembled final product. At the end of the day, I do see some differences. I think the GMO rollout is a very cautionary tale, for example, of how not to introduce a food to the public. The GMO conversation was really about benefiting particular companies, and it wasn't really immediately clear to consumers where the value would be. It didn't lead with the consumer first value proposition. And that's really different with plant-based foods, and we can learn from the negative experience of GMO, some of the GMO rollouts that happen. But plant-based foods do have extraordinarily obvious benefits to a lot of their consumers in terms of taste, in terms of health and nutrition, in terms of sustainability and effect on the planetary ecology. So as long as those benefits are really led with and explained, and as long as there's transparency about any sort of risks or inclusions in the ingredient statement, I don't think we're ever going to see, at least in most countries, a response to plant-based and plant-forward cooking the way that we saw with GMOs. And part of that's just because of long history. This is something that's been part of our culinary traditions for thousands of years, and it's not going away. It's just kind of evolving and changing and sort of entering more of the mainstream conversation, at least in the United States.
Exactly. And I think you're so right in just talking about transparency, because that's what the expectation is from all of us today about our food. We want to know exactly what's in it, where it's from, and then we can make our own choices based on that information.
Yes.
Great. I love this slide. We are showing some slides that Zak and GFI provided for us today to talk a little bit about, to show some examples of different points that he's making in our conversation today. So this is a pretty interesting one, I think, about sort of things that motivate people to choose plant-based cuisine or plant-based proteins. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about this particular slide, Zak.
Yeah, just to emphasize that there's a real diversity of motivations that are bringing people into the plant-based category, that are encouraging them to try more plant-forward cooking. And that's part of the reason why we think this is a long-lived trend, because it's not just one singular thing, like I'm trying to cut out gluten because I want to think clear, or I'm having digestive issues. There isn't sort of like one particular area that is driving the vast majority of people into this category. We do consistently see themes like what's listed here: health and wellness. I'm concerned about trying to avoid something, or I'm concerned about trying to have more of something else, like I'm trying to get more fiber in my diet, or I'm just trying to get more plants in general. Health and wellness is absolutely a big theme, but you can see here there's a lot of other reasons why consumers are interested in this. Taste and flavor is one. A lot of people just up and prefer the taste of this, or they like to integrate it as part of their rotation in the diet. Very few people just eat chicken, or just eat pork, or just eat fish and seafood. There are some who do, but a lot of consumers crave that diversity of different types of proteins and flavors and textures. And increasingly, we're seeing that plant proteins are kind of becoming that fifth category of protein that you're expecting. You're going to have beef, chicken, pork, fish, and seafood on a lot of different menus and in a lot of different homes. It's part of a kind of a rotation of dishes. But increasingly, plant protein at the center of the plate is becoming a part of that expectation. And it's just, again, going to part of that diversity. So, and there are other reasons, of course, like we've alluded to: sustainability, concern about animal welfare, or maybe it's just convenience. It's something you're used to cooking. But we find this, charts like this, and this is one of many I could show that just demonstrate there's a very wide variety of motivations for coming into this category. It's not just health, it's not just sustainability, it's all the above plus much more.
Right. So we had one question that came in about sustainability in terms of plant-based cuisine that we've taken a look at. And, even though in general, it's obviously plant-based proteins are more sustainable because of the better quality use and production of the raw material, the plant-based product consumed by humans versus animals and then converted beyond that. But there is a question about how do we manage sustainability of some kind of plant-based foods that maybe use a lot of water, like almonds, or in the production of almond milk. So maybe you can address that and talk about some of the good things about environmental impacts, and then how do we address some that might be more concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are really two parts to this. A lot of the sustainability benefits that come from switching to plant-based foods just come from the fact that, the production is so much more ecologically sustainable. It takes 9 calories into a chicken in the form of feed crops like corn and soy to get 1 calorie out in the form of meat. And chicken's one of the most efficient animals. So when we look at that kind of waste, that's literally like 800% food waste before we've even reached anywhere close to the consumer. And when you think about it, because you have to grow those crops, transport them to the chickens, feed the chickens, you get all that waste, it's way less efficient than just growing crops, processing them directly into food for humans. At the end of the day, that means you have to use 8 times as much land, 8 times as much water, as alluded to here, fertilizer, herbicide, pesticide, et cetera. And that just really jacks up the carbon footprint. So there's this essential, it's hard to ignore. It's just fundamental physics. Animals are not the most efficient biofactories at converting biomass into animal products. And so that's where plant-based products can come in, because we just harvest specific crops, process them directly into food, and then feed them directly to humans. So there's that sort of when you're making the comparison to animal protein production, you just have these fundamental ecological facts that make for much higher efficiencies. But at the end of the day, that doesn't also mean that the plant-based industry has responsibility to make sure all of its inputs are as sustainable and ecologically responsible as possible. So yeah, almonds are a great example. And one of the things that is so exciting about plant-based, I think, is the sheer biodiversity of the inputs that are not only being used currently, but also are theoretically possible. There are tens of thousands of different plants species, and then when we think about all the subvarietals of that, there's just unimaginable amounts of plants and different sources of ingredients that we've barely explored. And so if something like almond milk really does become a real sustainability challenge, there's a lot of other replacements, and the milk category is a great example of that. Oat milk, you've got hemp milk, flax milk, macadamia milk, soy milk. There's just so many different ways that we can, different sources of some of the core proteins there. And in a lot of cases, almonds might make sense in one part of the country or one part of the world, but might not make sense in other parts for a variety of reasons. So things like oats that can be grown in a much wider variety of areas, or sources from the pulse family, or cereal crops and grains. That's part of what's beneficial about this, is that we can tailor these supply chains to sort of local needs. And the other good news is there's an economic incentive to do this. It's really important as we think about using crops for plant-based milk, meat, and eggs, that we use the whole portion of the crop. So we don't just use the protein and discard that starch, that fiber, the leftover whole fragments, but find other uses for it. So whether that goes into the animal feed industry, whether that goes in as a feedstock to grow, fungi, or is used as a feedstock for fermentation for like algae-derived ingredients. We've done a lot of theoretical work on this at the Good Food Institute, but then we're also starting to see companies do this where they're breeding crops specifically so that they can maximize the amount of useful protein in them for, say, plant-based meat, but also the leftover remnants are ready to go into other, say, industrial processes or food and feed streams to valorize it. So yeah, it's definitely a concern, but again, that comparison is extremely important. And we think over time, the comparison between plant-based and animal-based ingredients in terms of ecological inputs is only that gap is only going to widen.
Exactly. And I think all of this focus on plant-based foods is also making biodiversity a very hot topic, and exploring all the different kinds of plants, like you say, that are available and out there that really haven't come into play at this point, but now they're starting to becoming more available or known. Chefs are starting to work with them and to experience, the idea of new flavors, new textures, new things to incorporate into their plant-based menus to make them more interesting. So that's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We had another question come in, and it kind of feeds into our next topic, which was, what do we see as the next trend? What do you see as the next trend in plant-based proteins in terms of specific items? And the question that came in was, other than mushrooms, what are good examples? What are the best examples of plant-based proteins that might closely mimic flavors of animal products or protein, probably in terms of umami and that kind of thing? Maybe you can kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so in terms of specific plant proteins, a lot of what we see is that historically, a lot of these products have relied on things like wheat and soy for that main primary protein source. But this sort of explosion of interest in plant-forward cooking has unleashed a lot of new potential ingredients, from things like mushrooms that can be processed and give you that great texture and a lot of the flavors. Things like jackfruit, which, even though it is a fruit, has the fibrous sort of texture that's very reminiscent of briskets or pulled pork type dishes, and is obviously very clean label and an extremely healthy replacement there. And it's kind of a flavor sponge for a lot of different things. In terms of actual plant crops, we're really excited about. A lot of interest and focus has been shifting to things like pea protein, things like oat protein, potato protein, rice protein. And then there's also additionally kind of this segment of more exotic protein plants. Exotic in the sense they're not as widely grown, but they show a lot of promise. So things like duckweed, things like lupin, things like mung beans that maybe aren't flavors that would be familiar to a mainstream palate, but provide a lot of excellent functionality, or at least promising right now, a lot of functionality for inclusion in plant-forward dishes, as well as in a lot of these plant-based products. So I don't have predictions about what the next hot plant-based protein is, but just as a category, anything in the pulse or lentil family is really exciting. And then we're also seeing an enormous amount of innovation in a category we roughly call fermentation-derived proteins, but it's just a fancy way of saying anything that's sort of a bacterial protein, a fungi-derived protein, or algae. So I think a lot of consumers are obviously familiar with mushrooms, but the root structure of mushrooms, mycelium, can be used to do everything from growing materials and construction materials to growing furniture to producing really highly textured food products. So we're extremely excited about a lot of the fungi startups that we're seeing enter this space. Algae offers an enormous amount of potential. Generally, you wouldn't be, you'd be processing it, of course, making it into a flour or a protein ingredient, but that's something we've really only barely begun to explore, but provides a lot of benefit. Also really easy to grow in a lot of different places and in a lot of different conditions that aren't necessarily conducive to growing row crops outdoors. And then even when I say like bacterial proteins, that might sound unfamiliar, but some of the companies that have gotten a lot of attention for stuff like that, it would include companies like Air Protein, which is literally taking sort of carbon dioxide out of the air and using it to grow protein, basically out of thin air, quote unquote. So there's a lot of really interesting sort of categories of ingredients that we see this going. And it's too early to tell what's going to end up winning, but we think exploration and R&D in all of those areas, both on a sort of a food product development side as well as a culinary side, is certainly warranted and exciting. Kind of like a whole new palette of colors to work with when you think about creating new dishes or formulating new products. Yeah, and then to focus on this slide a little bit, this is more focused, I think, instead of ingredients, on like formats of products. But this category, the first sort of breakout plant-based category in contemporary times, at least focused on the U.S., has been plant-based milks. Those used to be a pretty niche product, but as soon as they were put into a gable top carton and moved into the dairy case alongside regular cow's dairy milk, sales really took off. And at this point, plant-based milks account for about 13% of U.S. fluid milk sales in the retail channel. So from almost nothing to 13% in just under 10, 15 years is fairly impressive. And that really demonstrates how adjacency is pretty important. And we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. But burgers have been getting a lot of attention lately. Of course, 2019 saw a lot of really large restaurant chains either testing or launching a full national rollouts of plant-based burgers. I think probably the biggest chain and most noteworthy one would be Burger King, but many, many others have been launching those types of products. But what I think is underappreciated and where we really expect a lot of the attention to shift into 2020 and beyond is into other types of plant-based products for different occasions, different day parts, different product types. So the technology that allows a lot of plant-based companies to make an awesome burger is also really well suited to make really good sausage and sort of like ground products that aren't like a whole muscle cut like a steak, but are more of a restructured product that you're able to kind of mimics a ground meat product. So some of the things we have listed there, we really expect the grilling and sausage occasions to be very big growth areas for plant-based meat products this year. That opens up a lot of different particular types of dining occasions. So breakfast is a good example. We've already seen some pretty major plant-based meat breakfast launches from places like Starbucks and Dunkin', and we expect more of that to happen as you can replace the beef or the sausage or the chorizo and things like burritos and sandwiches for breakfast foods. Mexican, this was a category that really a lot of the big players embraced plant proteins in a big way in 2019, and it wasn't as well appreciated, but Chipotle, Taco Bell, Qdoba, Del Taco, a lot of really significant chains, most recently El Pollo Loco on the West Coast, have integrated plant-based meat in a significant way. They all put their own spin on it, but they've integrated it as part of their core menu, which is really exciting to see. So we expect pizza toppings will be big. We saw some major tests in 2019 and things that kind of replace that sausage or pepperoni type pizza topping with a plant-based protein option. The Italian segment, expect to see a lot more there. Subway's done some tests there, but also you see a lot of restaurants starting to integrate plant-based proteins into like pasta dishes, for example, or on sandwiches. And then things like chicken nuggets and tenders that, again, you can form using sort of that ground product as the base. So I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we also expect to see a little bit more of the blend trend here in the United States. It's really popular in Europe. It's something that I think the Culinary Institute's been instrumental in trying to, sort of promote here in the United States, and we really expect to see more more concepts that are blending mushrooms or some form of plant protein in with their animal meat, just to, again, it's really familiar to consumers, but it gives you a little bit of a better sustainability and health profile. So these are all, predictions based on our analysis, but we really think the products are there, and you're probably going to see a lot of these themes start to emerge in the plant-based stories from 2020 and beyond.
Well, and the fact that these particular organizations and restaurant chains or groups that you're talking about are seeing a need to include these certainly speaks to consumer demand, because that
Absolutely.
is their total focus. So yeah, and the blends is just such a great way to introduce these kinds of foods, to get people sort of used to including plant-based products with meats, and increasing not only their sustainability, but their health focus and their flavor. So we really like to talk about that as well. One other question that came in that sort of relates to this and what we've been talking about is what is the potential difference, if you can speak to this, about in carbon footprint and potential pollution from plant-based proteins to the new lab-grown proteins that are in sort of research phases at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so not as much of a focus today, but another whole separate category of products that we do a lot of research on at the Good Food Institute is, lab-grown, cultured, cultivated. There's a lot of different terms for it, but basically where you're growing animal meat, but just outside of the animal. So you're growing it in a cultivator and structuring it the way you want, and then harvesting and processing it into whatever products essentially that you could want, particularly meat products. So at an early stage, what we have now is, since this is only being done right now at sort of a small scale, the current life cycle assessments that we have suggest that there are enormous savings when it comes to water inputs, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, certainly when it comes to land use, because again, you have that inherent efficiency of, you can just take a sample of cells from an animal and you feed it exactly what it needs. You can even recycle that cellular media. And so there's a lot of potential savings there. But the caveat is we don't know exactly what the energy usage is going to look like yet for that production system. So that's something that'll have to be factored in. But early results are indicating that there are those sort of orders of magnitude savings in greenhouse gases, water, land. So it's very probable at the end of the day that the sustainability footprint will make a lot of sense, particularly in a lot of different types of countries where potentially, like maybe where land is less available, or where there are constraints on greenhouse gas emissions or carbon taxes, that sort of thing. So, but it's still early days. None of those products are on the market, and we don't know what it looks like yet at a full production scale. So more to come on that, but very promising early results. And I'm happy to share those individually with anyone if they're curious to email me afterwards.
So that's excellent. Let's move on to a topic about, producing foods with plant-based proteins in restaurants or food service operations, and talking about profitability related to that, in terms of, do restaurants and operators need special equipment? Do they need to think about different ways of cooking these products? And how does that relate to price points and profitability of menu items that include plant-based proteins?
Yeah. Well, I think, plant-based, again, it exists on a spectrum. There are some like really low-cost items like beans, legumes, a lot of the whole food type of ingredients that are really inexpensive and going to be a lot cheaper than a lot of the animal proteins. And that provides an opportunity to do things like the protein flip, where animal meat becomes more of a garnish or more of a side versus the center of the plate or the star of the dish. And then there are plenty of situations where plant-based products, particularly a lot of the newer products, come at a price premium. And so that's something certainly that is, should be, is something we take really importantly as an industry. So I think sort of at a high level, those prices absolutely will come down. Again, there's sort of an inherent ecological efficiency to producing plant-based proteins and ingredients that can't be matched by animal ingredients. And so there is over time, we think that, the economics there are going to catch up to the ecology. But yeah, where it stands right now is that some of these products are definitely at a premium. And what we've seen is that a lot of consumers, in a lot of the tests that have been done, different limited time offers, as well as major national rollouts and launches from a lot of restaurants, and food service operators has demonstrated that consumers have a willingness to pay a small to sometimes medium-sized premium for these products. So we've seen this in the case of places like Dunkin', places like Burger King, and even smaller launches of places like Gregory's, for example, like more medium-sized chains that consumers will pay a little bit of a premium. So they might, Carl's Jr., I think you pay $1 or $2 to upgrade your patty to a plant-based patty on any of their burger builds. Maybe you pay a little bit if you want to put, in some restaurants, like a plant-based chicken on your salad instead of a piece of salmon. So that upgrade type approach seems to work really well. But even in some of those case studies I've mentioning, check averages have gone up. So, not only is plant-based bringing in new consumers and new customers to a lot of different chains, but it's also getting those new consumers and existing customers to spend a little bit more marginal dollar on each transaction. And obviously that's an incredibly important part of profitability. So in the short term, I think that's probably the approach, is to position plant-based in a way that you can, if there is a premium for the ingredients, pass that along to your consumers in a palatable way. But over time, the industry is absolutely working on trying to achieve price parity. And in the medium to long run, we fully expect that plant-based protein ingredients will be much cheaper than animal protein ingredients. There's another specific thing you mentioned there, which is on like separate cooking equipment and making sure that it's not a significant capital expenditure for restaurants and operators. And I think that's pretty key with a lot of this, is that for most operators, you definitely don't need separate cooking equipment for producing plant-based and plant-forward dishes. And I'll caveat that, but again, in general, the vast majority of consumers who are enjoying and eating more plant-based foods, the vast majority of consumers, even for some of the buzzier new brands like Impossible Beyond, it's still 90 to 95% of their consumers are omnivores or flexitarians. They're having a plant-based burger one night and then a regular beef burger the next night. So those consumers, they're omnivores, they're flexitarians. They don't mind that it's cooked on the same equipment. It's really rare. The only types of consumers that really seem to strongly care about that are folks who are vegan or vegetarian, or have religious or like maybe allergenicity concerns with food. And if your restaurant or your food service concept operation has a large number of those types of eaters, then separate cooking equipment definitely makes sense. If you need to segment a certain grill just for non-allergenic items, that makes a lot of sense. But for the vast majority of mainstream concepts, we really don't think that cost is worth it, because at the end of the day, it's just regular mainstream, omnivore and flexitarian eaters that are enjoying these products.
That makes total sense. So there, as this slide mentions, there are many ways to include plant-based foods on your menu and different types of dishes. And maybe you have some ideas about, what we've talked a little bit about, different parts of meals, parts of dishes that are popular, but do you have any specifics that are, really successful? And I know you have an example of a case study where it really wasn't a success to introduce a particular item on a menu. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit. What considerations should chefs have when thinking about what kind of plant-based foods to introduce to their menus?
Yeah, I think the biggest consideration is it's got to fit with your operation, whatever that looks like. It's got to fit with your brand, your consumer base, your menu, your back of the house operations. Plant-based is like anything else. It is an exciting category right now, but you can't just view it as a silver bullet. You don't just drop it on the menu as an afterthought and expect that a bunch of people are just going to buy it. I mean, I'm sure that happens sometimes, but in general, it's better to be prepared, right? And as we talked about at the beginning, think through your promotion really carefully. Make sure that the messaging about the flavor and the entire experience is, reflective of all the other foods that you serve at your establishment. And making sure that it fits your concept is incredibly important. And then part of that is exciting too, right? Like there's a lot of different ways to do plant-based through 3 different, kinds of examples up here. There are hundreds more. There are so many different cultural and ethnic traditions and global flavors to draw inspiration from. There's a lot of exciting new ingredients to be working with and exciting types of dishes. So that's an opportunity, but you don't want to go too far outside of the comfort zone of your customers, of your staff, of your brand, in order to kind of check the box for plant-based. And I think that the case that you're alluding to, a good example of this is Tim Hortons in Canada. Tim Hortons introduced a plant-based burger earlier in 2019 and ended up really scaling back the launch eventually. And there were a lot of really good reasons for that. Tim Hortons isn't necessarily known for being a burger brand. It's more of a breakfast cafe concept. So that didn't really feel like a good fit with their menu. As a brand, a lot of Canadians really sort of, I think, sort of resent the intrusion of an American company, Burger King, which purchased Tim Hortons a few years ago. And they felt like it was kind of an incursion into something that is, for them, you know, a really powerful national brand. So wasn't necessarily a great fit from that kind of public relations standpoint. And then operationally, I don't think it was a really good fit. Most Tim Hortons don't have grills. They rely on ovens and I think to a limited extent microwaves for heating. And that's just not generally the best way to produce a burger. That creates a lot of spoilage, creates a lot of less than desirable flavor experiences. And Tim Hortons in 2019, they've admitted this. They did about well over 60 different LTOs, limited time offers, during 2019. So when you think about, like, that's over one new test or launch every week, the amount of staff training and like drive-through time increases and all that, that just adds a lot of complexity. So, you know, again, plant-based is something that should fit, you know, that brand, that consumer, that back of the house operation. And if it doesn't, you know, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I mean, it really is all about incorporating something that is part of who you are and who your brand is, so that the customer will become, you know, be familiar with it, be interested in trying something different. And if it's something totally alien to them, it's not really going to be a successful offering.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked a little bit about this plant-based proteins offering a platform for creativity and innovation. And, you know, I think you and I talked also about the fact that it really makes sense for a whole variety of different cuisine areas, world cuisines, because those cuisines tend to be very plant-forward in their historical context anyway. So this is a perfect introduction to those, to including plant-based proteins into those different cuisine areas, as well as to just most any other kind of menu that, but within, like you're saying, what fits within that particular menu and for your consumer base. So I don't know if you want to speak to this slide any further.
Yeah, absolutely. It basically, like, the point I was trying to get across here is that, yeah, there's plant-based is an exciting opportunity. I think, you know, listed a few things. You get to play around with your existing dishes and put a fun twist on them. You get to create new dishes with plant-based ingredients. Maybe work with exciting combinations of things with, you know, maybe animal protein and plant protein existing side by side, either as garnishes to each other or even blended together literally into products. And then, yeah, whole new kinds of foods that you get to work with. It's a really an exciting platform for culinary creativity. And I'll add to that, I think the key point here, one of those bullet points, is versatility. When you add one or two plant-based ingredients, that gives you this potential to, you know, try all these different types of dishes. So, and you know, that might matter more in some concepts than others. But if you're full service, if you're providing a wide variety and serving a wide variety of diners and eaters, being able to have, you know, one additional product in stock in your pantry and getting all these new dishes out of it, burgers, dumplings, salad toppings, pasta inclusions, meatballs, that type of thing, that's really valuable. You know, it provides this opportunity to not add a lot of complexity to your supply chain, but still adding a lot more excitement in the front of the house. So, and as I alluded to earlier too, it is showing itself right now to be attracting new consumers, raising that check average. And then part of that new consumer appeal is that, you know, you're eliminating that veto vote. If groups are in a dining situation and they have somebody with an allergy or some particular dietary limitation, having these kinds of options on the menu makes your establishment a little bit friendlier for that group.
Most definitely. So this is such an incredible topic that we could go on forever, but in the interest of staying close to the time that we promised for our listeners, let's talk about a couple of other quick things. First, what do you see as the longevity of this trend in plant-based proteins?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm biased. I study this all the time, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But we think there are a lot of sort of fundamental indicators that suggest that this is a long-lived trend. Where we have been able to test it, repeat purchase rates are high. There's a pretty high level of category loyalty. Once consumers try it, a lot of them like it. As I alluded to earlier, there's a diversity of reasons and motivations for why consumers come into this space: health, the environment, animal welfare, a lot of different motivators, and that's a positive sign to us. And as we talked about too, it takes a variety of forms and products. It's, everything from whole food to, more assembled products, everything from high price and premium down to like really low cost ingredients. So that diversity is a good indication it has staying power. We've seen it as we alluded to, plant-based is more than just a one-hit wonder. It's, succeeded in the milk category. It's definitely taken off a ton in burgers, but it's growing beyond the burger, right? It's growing to breakfast and Mexican and Italian and all these other different segments and day parts. We've seen it stay on menus in a lot of like individual case studies that we do, places that were early adopters like TGI Fridays or White Castle, for example, put it on the menu years ago and they still have it. And a lot of chains have even doubled down and added additional items to the menu. Burger King did that. Carl's Jr. and Hardee's have done that. So those all give us indication that it has long-term staying power. And then of course, you look at future generations, younger consumers, millennials and Gen Z, the demand is off the charts. They significantly over-index for eating these products and being interested in eating more of them. So when you're looking, 5, 10, years down the road, 15 years down the road, as those generations kind of age into more and more purchasing power, and they start feeding their families, because their millennials are having families now, they're feeding kids, a lot of them are parents. That's kind of this. It's almost not even a trend. It's almost like a paradigm shift in demand for these types of foods.
Good. I think there's another slide indicating the increase in market share for these products. Also supports the continuation of, like you're saying, more of a paradigm shift than an actual trend. People are thinking differently about how they're eating.
Absolutely.
And then maybe talk a little bit about this slide and just the future, and then let's address one last topic after you talk about this.
Yeah, just the main points here, I think, what's exciting about the future of these products is that we have so much control and can customize them so much. So whether that's down the road, maybe a steak that has your restaurant's logo on it, all the way through to like literally customizing the individual nutrition profile of that product directly to you, maybe creating it for an athlete or for elderly populations, or being able to even like control like very minutely, like maybe we swap out saturated fat and we put in more unsaturated fat, or maybe we, put in different micronutrients and fortify with different vitamins than we've ever been able to do before. So that customizability gives us a lot of flexibility to do cool things. Additionally, we are able to just produce the highest value products. We don't have to grow a whole cow and then get, just a small bit of sirloin and then a lot of like ground beef. We can just grow the cuts people want. We can just, produce yellowfin, bluefin tuna. We can just produce like really high value things. And when we think about like in a world where sirloin costs the same as a hamburger, what does that do to consumption patterns, right? Like that would change everything. And that's all theoretically possible with a lot of these alternative protein platforms. We can also do it quickly, a lot less supply chain interruptions, hours and days instead of like weeks and months and years in the case of animal proteins. So a lot of advantages we think give it kind of an operational edge over animal proteins in the long run.
So too. And lastly, based on the situation that we're currently in with our COVID-19 isolation and the disruption to our industry, which is so challenged and from every level, what do you think the plant-based protein market, either how is it affected or how can it contribute positively? How do you think it fits into the situation that we're currently in?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both sort of threats and challenges as well as opportunities. So I think, plant-based is kind of a challenger category. It's growing fast. And part of that, one of the benefits of being a challenger category when you're working in food service is that food service, they prepare the food. It's a place where a lot of people encounter new trends. And so this kind of like less people going out to eat is definitely, more tough if you're a newer brand. So I think a lot of plant-based companies and plant-forward cooking type folks are going to have to rely a lot more on retail to get these products out, which is certainly a change from what we've seen in the past, where food service has been on the leading edge of this trend in a lot of ways. Retail is going to have to catch up significantly. And another shift we see in a lot of recessions or situations like this is that consumers really, seek what's familiar and comfortable, and really want foods that are affordable. And so you tend to see a lot of shift towards cheaper sources of food. And so that's going to increase the pressure on plant-based brands, which is a good pressure to bring those costs down and make sure that, you know, they are at the end of the day able to be a profitable and affordable choice for a lot of people. There's also some opportunities, though, that I think that this sort of situation presents to the plant-based industry. I think non-commercial food service is going to bounce back probably a little bit quicker, for example, than a lot of commercial restaurants will. And non-commercial food service, hospitals, college and university, a lot of business cafeterias are really well suited in terms of consumer base and cost and margin structure for plant-based food. So I expect that they'll do well there. Additionally, like the situation kind of calls into mind in the head of the consumer, like, you know, questions about health and where food comes from and what sorts of food gives rise to things like the coronavirus. So, and while I expect that'll be something that some consumers pay attention to and some don't, we know the food industry and supply chain is paying attention to this. So the fact that, you know, you don't need to use antibiotics, you don't have things like overfishing, you don't have things like African swine fever or diseases that make the jump from animals to humans, like the coronavirus. The fact that you don't have that in a paradigm where you're using plants or other sources of protein to produce meat, eggs, and dairy, I think is going to have a lot of appeal for the food industry. And so in the long run, I think there's going to be an appreciation for there's less supply chain risk, less volatility for producing these plant-based products in the long run when you think about some of the current crises and supply chain disruptions. But time will tell. A lot of threats, a lot of opportunities, and it's certainly it's probably a little too early to tell exactly what the effect's going to be, but that's our anticipation of some of the ways that plant-based could potentially benefit.
Yeah, that's excellent points, and we thank you for all of that great information. I mean, we're all regarding this whole situation. There's a lot to wait and see for at this point, but you had some great thoughts on that. So thank you. And thank you, Zak, for everything you've shared with us today. We appreciate it so much. We didn't get to everyone's questions, but Zak has agreed to allow us to share his email address. In fact, I don't know if you want to say it at this point because he's willing to take emails to answer questions individually if any of you are interested in getting a specific question answered that we weren't able to address today. Do you want to tell us your email, Zak?
Yep, absolutely. Just Zak, ZAKW @gfi.org. I've dropped in the chat as well.
Great. And we will also send out a link to this video for this conversation today, and it will be posted on the foodbusinessschool.org website. I'll send it out to everyone who was registered for this session today, probably next week. And it'll include a link to Zak's PowerPoint, even more extensive than the few slides that we've showed today, as well as contact information. So just want to say once again, thank you so much, Zak, for this incredible information. And if everyone would like to stay for just a couple of minutes, I'll tell you a little bit about what else we have going on at Food Business School. Thanks again, Zak. Have a great day. All right, so I wanted to tell you all about our master's degree programs at the CIA, which are currently running and relatively new. Our Mastering the Business of Food program is fully, almost fully online. It's a 2-year online master's degree in food business, and it includes 3 short residencies, but the bulk of the instruction is online and is intended for people who are working professionals with busy lives, and they achieve this degree by attending these programs over 2 years. So we have our current original cohort, which started in 2018, will graduate this summer, and our second cohort is just finishing up their first year. We are currently accepting applications for the next start date, which is in fall of 2020. So we will convene with a residency in Napa Valley at the end of August, and the online courses will start in September of this year. And then we also have a Master's of Professional Studies in Wine and Beverage Management. That one currently takes place on campus at the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone in Napa Valley. And we are also currently accepting applications for that program starting this coming fall. It is a 2-semester master's degree. So it's very intensive on site in Napa Valley from September basically to April of the following year. and yields a master's degree in wine and beverage management. Both of these applications can be found or reached through the ciachef.edu/masters website, and all of the details related to these two programs are on that website. So if anyone's interested, we'd look forward to receiving your application for either one of those programs for this coming fall. Also, if you're looking to have a taste of those programs or just have a short course that is for executive education open enrollment, so anyone can enroll in these courses. We have 3 courses running right now, started this week, that are totally asynchronous. So you can join now or anytime between now and the time that they end, basically in late April, and still participate fully in discussion forums and interaction with other people participating in these courses. The content is released weekly and then available to you indefinitely after you take the course. Each one of these courses are taught by a faculty member who also teaches in our master's degree program, and are just a very intensive block of information on these different topics. Food experience design, which is a design thinking for food products, food businesses, food venture formation and financing, all about, structure of a food venture, whether it's a product or a food service type of operation, and then building blocks of brand. So what is, how to build your brand and all the different things associated with branding a new product. And here is a special code for anyone who is interested in signing up for these. The individual courses are $149, or you can take all 3 for $379. But if you use this special code from today, you can save 15% off either of those prices, FBS-FAST15 at checkout. So those are the links to registration for those courses are on our website at foodbusinessschool.org under online courses. So we would look forward to see any of you in these courses or your applications for master's programs. We will also be scheduling another FoodBiz Plus probably in a couple of months after things settle down a little bit. I'll have some more experts to have conversations with and invite you to, so you keep a lookout for that on the foodbusinessschool.org website as well. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in a future program. Have a great day. Please stay safe, everyone. Take care of yourselves and stay well. Thanks again. Bye-bye.